Yes.
So good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? We're going to try and make it a dialogue so that we're not moving the microphone around. So if you can't hear, we encourage you to come nearer the front. So welcome and thank you very much for attending this afternoon. The panel this afternoon is looking at Including the North, Indigenous Languages and Inclusion Policies in Education. This event is part of the UNESCO UNITWIN International Year of Indigenous Languages, and this event is part of that celebration of Indigenous languages. But we're going to speak also very much about inclusion more generally, because this event is also being held in conjunction with the University of the Arctic Thematic Network for Teacher Education in Social Justice and Diversity in Education. Come in, welcome. And we've decided that we're going to not just do one long panel, we've decided to break up the hour and a half we have, so it's slightly more multimodal. So we're going to start with a little introduction from myself, and then we're going to show you two short videos. We're really keen that we're talking about education, and we're talking about Indigenous languages, and you don't want to just hear academics. It is really important that we also hear the voices of the young people. Then we're going to have a 4-minute introduction from each member of the panel. They will introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their region or their national context. We'll then have about half an hour's time when we'll have some discussion. I will invite questions from the floor. And then finally we have a celebration. We're going to launch our book, which has recently been published from the network, the thematic network. I will encourage you again at the end, but please do help yourself to one of the books. They are free. And also we have some copies of our project findings. Please feel free to take as many as you wish of the project findings and to distribute them to your colleagues at home. Okay, we're ready? We're good. So the first of the videos, what brings us together is that when we're working with Indigenous communities, there's a geographical difference often because we're dealing with very rural areas, often sparsely populated. But when we also bring in the idea of Indigenous languages and cultures, often there is a tension between education policy, which is often written in large urban areas, and that's in tension with the culture and the languages of the Indigenous communities. Often those Indigenous communities, there's a tradition of knowledge being transmitted intergenerationally within families, and that's very different to formal education. Many of these communities also have oral traditions, and again, that's in tension with the very written-based educational policies that we have at a national level. So now I'm going to invite each of the panel members to speak about their regional or national context for about 4 minutes. And first we have Diane, who is also our technical quiz.
Yes. So I'm Diane Hirschberg, and I am a professor of education policy at the Institute of Social and Economic Research, Center for Alaska Education Policy Research at University of Alaska, Anchorage. And what I'm speaking to, we've been talking about national context, but in the United States, education is a responsibility of individual states, and the states differ considerably. So I'm speaking today about the Alaska context rather than the federal responsibility. There are some federal rules about equity and educational policies, but for the most part, it's really done at the state and the local level as well. So like in many places, Alaska has policy on the books, and then there's policy as it is implemented or enacted. So that's an important point as well when you're looking at these policies we're talking about and then what actually is happening in the classroom. Alaska does not have a state curriculum. We have state standards. So we say when a young person graduates, there are certain things they should have learned, but there is not one curriculum, not one set of textbooks, not a specific way of getting to those standards prescribed at the state level. And in the state standards, there's only one place where Indigenous cultures are really talked about, and that is that high school students have to complete an Alaska Studies course that, in theory, will introduce the different Alaska cultures. But in practice, the way Alaska Studies is taught varies enormously, and quite often right now is not a very strong curriculum. The other is that educators who are teaching in the state must have coursework in multicultural education and an Alaska history class. But since more than 70% of our educators come from outside the state, they are learning in 2 classes a little bit about the students that they're teaching in the history of the place, but not a whole lot. In 2010, the Alaska State Board of Education adopted the Alaska Cultural Standards for Education, which were created back in 1998 through the Alaska Rural Systemic Initiative. And there are 5 broad standards that include that culturally responsive educators incorporate local ways of knowing and teaching in their work. Culturally responsive educators use the local environment and community resources on a regular basis to link what they are teaching to everyday lives of the students. Culturally responsive educators participate in community events and activities in appropriate and supportive ways. Culturally responsive educators work closely with parents to achieve a high level of complementary educational expectations between home and school. And culturally responsive educators recognize the full educational potential of each student and provide the challenges necessary for them to achieve that potential. But despite this, we continue to see very Western education offered in all of our schools, including in our remote communities that have 80–90% Indigenous students. And it really is this disconnect between what policy says and practice. In terms of language policy, as you can see, Alaska is home to a large number of Indigenous peoples from very different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. And there are 20 distinct Indigenous languages, and that doesn't include all the sub-dialects. And if anybody's interested, I can share where you can look at this more and I can talk about some of those differences. But it's important to understand that these languages are in crisis and most are predicted to become extinct or dormant before the end of the 21st century. And it's the history, like in most of the North, formal schooling initially set out to destroy local culture and language and replace it with the language of the colonizers, which was English in this case. This began to change at the same time that land claims were being settled in 1972 when the state legislature actually enacted a law supporting native languages, mandating that children be introduced to education in their native language or in every school where there were 15 or more students where the dominant language was other than English. And this changed to where there was a minimum of 8 students speaking that language. It also required that they have a teacher fluent in their language and educational materials in that language. But unfortunately, there were no resources to do this. There were no educators functionally in most of these languages. And so this was on the book, but never really implemented. In 1995, the legislature passed a bill on native language education stating that school boards should establish a local native language curriculum advisory board for each school in the district where the majority of students are Alaska Native, and any school district with Alaska Native students can have this sort of board. Again, this has not really led to widespread teaching of languages, except with some growth for the two largest language groups, the Inupiaq or Inuit language and Yupik. And Yupik is the strongest indigenous language in the state. In 2014, we really began to see a shift in that Alaska became the second state in the United States after Hawaii to actually recognize indigenous languages as official state languages alongside English. And this was very significant because in 1998, voters in Alaska had passed what we call an English-only bill, saying that the official language was English. So the voters and communities began to recognize the importance. But again, no resources, no enforcement, other than with some judicial cases. In 2018, so just last year, following the recommendations of the Alaska Native Language Preservation and Advisory Council, the legislature passed a bill that declared a linguistic emergency in recognition of the threat of multiple indigenous languages going extinct. Now again, this has yet to result in additional funds, and we now have a governor who is hostile to many things, educational, but in particular to indigenous languages and indigenous cultures being taught. So we're having to fight hard. But at the same time, we do have language immersion schools growing in number in our state. And so we are hoping that we will be able to preserve the indigenous languages within our system and within our state, at least those that still have speakers of them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So that's Alaska, USA, and we're now going to the other side of the world. And I'd like to invite, well, Natalia's not on the stage, but Svetlana to represent Russia.
Thank you. Second. Come up. There we go.
Okay. Сегодня мне будет помогать Дарья.
I will be translating for Svetlana today.
Ненецкий автономный округ входит в состав Архангельской области. Численность ненцев, носителей языка, составляет около 7,5 тысяч человек. В Ненецком автономном округе принят закон о ненецком языке на территории Ненецкого автономного округа.
So today Svetlana is making a presentation on indigenous languages, Sami and Nenets, in the education policy of the Arkhangelsk and Murmansk regions of Russia. Nenets Autonomous District is a part of the Arkhangelsk region. The number of native speakers of the Nenets language is about 7,500 people. And in the Nenets Autonomous District, there was adopted a law on the Nenets language on the territory of the district.
В тексте закона указано, что ненецкий язык является частью культуры и традиционного образа жизни ненецкого народа, который используется в процессе повседневного общения в сфере общественных отношений, воспитания и обучения.
The law states that the Nenets language is a part of culture and traditional lifestyle of the Nenets people and is used in everyday communication in the sphere of public relations, education and training.
Законодательная база Ненецкого автономного округа переведена на ненецкий язык. Официальное делопроизводство в местах компактного проживания ненецкого народа ведется именно на ненецком языке.
The regulatory framework of the Nenets Autonomous District is translated into the Nenets language. Official office administration and record keeping is conducted in the Nenets language in the so-called areas of compact residence of the Nenets people. So the areas which have a high concentration, a large proportion of ethnic Nenets population.
Существуют официальные печатные издания на ненецком языке, 3 общественно-политические газеты, издаются учебники и учебно-методические пособия.
There exist official print media in the Nenets language, 3 social and political newspapers, and also textbooks and teaching aids.
При использовании ненецкого языка на радио и телевидении одновременно производится перевод предоставляемой информации на русский язык, как государственный язык Российской Федерации.
When the Nenets language is used on radio or television, a translation into Russian is provided, since the Russian language is the only state language of the Russian Federation.
В системе образования на территории Архангельской области используется русский язык, но в детских садах и в школах Ненецкого автономного округа обучение и воспитание детей реализуется в том числе с использованием ненецкого языка.
The education system in the Arkhangelsk region normally uses the Russian language. However, in kindergartens and schools of the Nenets Autonomous District, the Nenets language is used in education and training activities alongside with Russian.
Ненецкий язык как родной преподается в 7 детских садах, в 13 общеобразовательных школах, и все учащиеся 8-9 классов школ Ненецкого автономного округа в обязательном порядке изучают традиции, культуру, быт ненецкого народа на уроках учебного предмета «Наш край».
The Nenets language as a native language is taught in 7 kindergartens and in 13 general education schools of the Nenets Autonomous District. And all school students in the 8th and the 9th grades are obliged to study traditions, culture and lifestyle of the Nenets people within the school subject called Our Land.
Еще одна коренная народность, которая проживает на наших арктических территориях, это Сами.
And now we're going to speak about the Sami people, which are indigenous people of the north of Russia as well.
В Российской Федерации Самы преимущественно проживают в Мурманской области, в селе Лавозеро. Численность носителей языка составляет чуть более 350 человек.
The Sami people in Russia mainly live in the Murmansk region, in the village of Lovozero. The number of native speakers is just over 350.
Самский язык изучается в общеобразовательной школе, которая расположена в этом селе. В начальной школе с 1 по 4 класс самский язык изучается в рамках дополнительного образования 1 час в неделю по выбору учащихся и их родителей.
The Sami language is taught in the general education school of Lovozero settlement. In elementary school, grades 1 to 4, the Sami language is a part of supplementary education and is taught 1 hour a week to those children whose parents have chosen it.
Самский язык также могут изучать жители этого села в национально-культурном центре. Проблема сохранения и развития самского языка обсуждается на уровне правительства Мурманской области.
The villagers can learn the Sami language at the National Cultural Center of Lovozero as well. The problem of preserving and developing the Sami language is discussed at the government level in the Murmansk region.
Создана научно-исследовательская лаборатория по саамскому языку в Арктическом центре научных исследований в городе Мурманск. Сотрудники лаборатории работают над изданием учебно-методической и художественной литературы, издают сказки, стихи, повести на саамском языке и работают вот в этом направлении.
There has been established a research laboratory on the Sami language at the Arctic Center for Scientific Research and Expertise in the city of Murmansk. The laboratory prepares both educational literature and publishes fictions like fairy tales, poems, short novels, as well in the Sami language. So this is what we can say about Nenets and Sami languages in the education policy in Arkhangelsk and Murmansk regions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to see photographs of the Nenets and Sami people. Sufi, you're next. Would you like to use the microphone, or are you quite happy to speak?
Well, I can use it, yeah.
Yes.
So,
There we go.
yeah, it's easier this way. My name is Suvi Lokkala and I come from Finland, University of Lapland. I work there as a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Education. And I will speak about inclusive education in a more general level, and my colleague Jatta later will tell more about the Sami people in Finnish Lapland. In Finland, the most northern part, the Finnish Lapland, mainly consists of small communities or villages, and they are quite far of each other. People's lifestyle differ from the Finnish mainstream culture, as it is closely connected to various activities related to nature, like fishing, berry picking, hunting. And as I said, the indigenous Sami people's homeland is located there in Finnish Lapland. What is positive is that Finnish education system gives space for local decision making too. And in general, in Finland we have very equal and unified basic education system. For example, in Sodankylä, in one of the Lapis municipalities, the local children are taught the traditional words that describe the 8 seasons of the year. But then about the problems in basic education in Finnish Lapland, well, the problem arises, of course, from the small number of inhabitants and the large geographical area. For example, many small schools have had to adopt multi-age classrooms, and then there are problems in arranging special needs support and student welfare services, which would require experts at schools. For example, there might be one special education once a week in one small school. We have done some studies with our research team there back in the north, and for example, the students found it problematic to talk about one's problems at school, for example, because the school nurse might be your mother's friend. So because the communities are so small. However, there are some welfare services like health and mental issues that can be delivered by distance services. For example, the Central Hospital of Lapland and the Lapis Center for Social Services have developed distance services. Well, after the compulsory education ends, there are new problems, and one could see them through those videos also. When the compulsory education ends, the students are about 15 or 16 years old, and about half of them will stay in the local general upper secondary school, or one could say also high school. Luckily, some high schools still exist there in small municipalities. And then the other half will have to leave home to get an occupation. The nearest places are most likely in the city of Rovaniemi or Kemi. They are located in southern Lapland, hundreds of kilometers away of the students' home. So when the students arrive to their vocational education and training institute and to dormitory, they will have to learn how to cook, wash their clothes, make friends, find something interesting to do in the city, which is quite different what they have used to do. So these youngsters are at risk of having problems. The vocational colleges, they are in crucial position to identify their role as the provider of safe and nurturing living conditions for those young people. And this position requires multi-professional work, which is extremely difficult. and especially when it has to emphasize early support and preventive social welfare work, also during these educational transition phases. We have just now started a new project called Wellbeing in Wet. And our aim is to develop the educational transitions and supportive systems for Lapis young people. So I think that I've used my 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to Norway and then we'll come back to Finland to hear a little bit more about the Indigenous communities. I should explain that Gregor is not Norwegian. You've got 2 Scots on the panel.
Indeed, not Norwegian, but representing Norway. Nevertheless, I've been living in that country for 7 years now and consider it home. I am nevertheless qualified to talk about that. I should introduce myself. My name is Gregor Maxwell. I am an Associate Professor in Inclusive and Special Education at the University of Tromsø, also known as the Arctic University of Norway, just to give it its full name. First, I'm going to talk a bit generally about inclusive education and how policies have spun out in Norway in the last 40-50 years. Then I will focus specifically on the Sami people, because they are a significant minority group in Norway. So, generally speaking, Norway has been fairly Norway was fairly early in adopting inclusive education policies. In 1975, there was a new education law that replaced the then existing separate special education and general education laws. This meant that throughout the 1980s and through the 90s as well, there was a considerable focus on mainstreaming and integrating of previously separate school systems. And throughout this process, there was the Norwegian concept of adapted education. This was central to this change that came in 1975, and that is that education will be adapted to fit everybody's way of learning. Now, that's the general education stuff. If we hop over to the world of the Sami people, around about the same time, in the late 1960s, there was a considerable interest and invigoration of the Sami culture and identity. And this culminated in the establishment in 1990 of the Sami Parliament in Kautokeino in the north of Norway. This parliament is a non-territorial organization, so anybody who identifies as Sami within Norway has a right to vote and participate in the political life there. However, the form that this parliament expresses itself tends to be limited to the northern part of Norway. And if we have a map there from, yes, this red line here and north are the main areas where the Sami people are located in Norway, although there are also significant populations in the big cities as well. What this means in terms of the way Sami education is played out, while everybody has a right to receive Sami education, only those who live within the northern territories, the northern municipalities, sorry, I should use the correct terminology, have an automatic right to education in the Sami language. In other municipalities in Norway, you have to have a minimum of 10 children before the municipality is legally obliged to deliver the education. In terms of the curriculum that the schools and all schools, both preschool and primary school and up over. In terms of the curriculum, they follow a parallel curriculum with the main Norwegian language curriculum. Both of these curriculums, of course, have a focus on Sami culture. So there is no significant extra focus on the Sami within the Sami curriculum, at least as such. No presentation is complete without a few statistics, so I can throw some out there just to put things into context. The north of Norway has about 500,000 people living there. This is quite densely populated for an Arctic region, but nevertheless we have 35 Sami medium preschools, and to my knowledge 3 primary schools and one middle and upper secondary school, mainly found in and around Kautokeino, but there are others in Tromsø and further south as well. In terms of numbers of children, we have about 800 children who are following an exclusive Sami language-based education, out of about a total population within the country of about 640,000. So this is still a fairly small number, but it is reflective of change. It has only been in the last 20 or 25 years that this education has been available, so it is developing ever rapidly. So I think I've probably used up my 4 minutes, and I thank you for your attention there. We're going on now to...
We're going back to Finland, to Margareta.
Thank you. I am Margareta Kotilainen from the University of Lapland, and I work there as a project manager. I used to work also class teacher and language teacher, and was involved in many projects aiming to develop languages in Rovaniemi and in Lapland. I completed my doctoral thesis in distance learning. Okay, and just like Suvi mentioned, I'm focusing on Sami language in Finland, policy and practices. Okay. In Finland, Sami education is covered by the Basic Education Act, and Sami education follows national curriculum. It doesn't have its own curriculum, just like you have in Norway. That's a pity. And one of the most important reforms of education legislation was implemented in 1998. According to this, organizing the Sami language teaching became the responsibility of the municipalities of the Sami region, which means upper northern municipalities, 3 municipalities, and also part of Sodankylä. And as a result, all Sami children and youth living in Sami homeland, Sami region, can go to Sami classes in elementary schools and get their education in their own Sami language. And it's really good that the Finnish state supports Sami education. The Sami municipalities receive 100% state subsidy for organizing and maintaining introduction in the Sami classes. But what about the Sami children living outside the Sami region? There are over 70% of them, Sami children live in other places all over the Finland until school age. And these children are completely devoid of legal protection. And Sami language teaching can merely be given on the basis of separate decision of the Ministry of Education. And in practice it means currently that they get 2 hours per week Sami lessons through distance education, and this is as an experiment still. But that's not enough. According to survey 2014, Sami language threatens disappear in cities. Urban Sami people are concerned and worried because they would like to transfer language and within language the culture for their children. There has been luckily established some Sami language centers and Sami daycare centers in cities in Oulu, Rovaniemi, capital Helsinki, as well as some classes in some cities like in Helsinki last year, and it's planned to establish also in Oulu and in Rovaniemi in future. And to conclude my 4 minutes, I would like to say that the main task is to guarantee the pathway from the early years until to the upper levels. That's the question, that's the answer for the question. The result is to functional bilingualism and strengthening of cultural identity and participation in Sami society. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll speak just very briefly about Scottish Gaelic. I think there's a slide. Scottish Gaelic is one of the pan-Celtic languages, and I'll speak about it because there's actually quite a lot of similarities for Gaelic speakers and education, similar to those in the Arctic, although I'm very aware that Scotland is not an Arctic nation. Very similar to many of the other Indigenous communities that have been mentioned today. For a long time, because of colonisation, we were not allowed, and I use the word we because I'm a Gaelic speaker, we were not allowed to have education in our own language. So my grandparents' generation would have received physical punishment if our language was heard within the schools. When I was growing up, my parents realised that I was only speaking Gaelic as I was learning to speak, and so they deliberately spoke English to me so that I would have English by the time I got to school. Many of my cousins didn't. To the point where now my niece and nephew, we've moved on, and my niece and nephew have been able to attend from the Crolachin, that's the nursery 0 to 3, right up to, if they choose to, they will be able to go through primary school, secondary school, and also go to the Gaelic University, Salmarostig, and do even their PhD if they wish in the Gaelic language. Educationally, from sort of the middle of the 20th century, you were able to take Gaelic in secondary school as a subject, but it was only in the 1980s because of parental pressure that there were Gaelic medium units established where Gaelic was used as the medium of instruction for all the subjects. And once Scotland got its own parliament again after 300 years, we were able to make Gaelic a main language, a recognised language within the country, so that we had legal rights to have funding for Gaelic medium education. Now, unlike Norway, even right across Scotland, if you have one child in the community who wants to have Gaelic as the medium of instruction, the local authority has to provide that from age 5 to 18. And of course that causes enormous problems because we don't have enough Gaelic teachers. And for many of us who are of an age to actually be the teachers, we're really good at speaking our own language, but we're not very good at reading and writing it. And we're not very confident about our reading and writing. So although I'm here representing Gaelic, I have never, I'm a senior lecturer, I've worked at a Scottish university, I've worked in lots of Scottish schools. I now work in the north of England. I'm not very good at reading and writing my own language. So that causes problems and may, as other Indigenous languages become stronger and become legislated. So that's a very brief description of some of the elements of Scottish Gaelic. We're now moving on to the panel discussion. I think that we've got a very wide geographical spread here, but thinking about general inclusion in these geographically spread, rural, sparsely populated parts of the world, and also thinking about inclusion of the Indigenous languages, I think there are commonalities across this very wide geographical spread. I've got lots of questions I'd like to ask the panel, and perhaps the panel have questions they'd like to ask each other. But perhaps, is there anybody from the audience who would like to ask a question? Thank you.
One of the things that seemed to come up a lot was that there's a lack of instructor capacity in many of these languages. Do you know of any programs happening at teaching universities in order to try and address this, or is this still very much an open question?
And I'm not going to ask everybody to speak. I'm going to ask for volunteers. So is there anybody who would like to speak? I can give them the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can answer on behalf of the Sami education in that there's Sami University it's in the north of Norway. There's also one in Finland. That's okay. But the one in Norway offers teacher education in the Sami language. So yes, there is that initiative. That program is fairly young, from my understanding, 5 or 10 years most. Yeah.
Okay, and the Finnish Sami, they have lots of common in Norway. You know, in your Sami people, so those northern Sami region people, and many class teachers from Finland, they go together as well.
Yeah.
And in all, it is not possible to qualify in a class teacher in Sami language, but Sami language itself may have great. We have together same place, I think.
Yeah. Yes. Just to remind the geographical identity, to talk of the Sami as one group, you have to remember that they span 4 of our definitions of countries. So there's a lot of fluidity between the borders. So as my colleague here mentioned, a lot of the Finnish people go to Norway technically, so they go to another country, but they're still within their same language and culture. Sorry.
So, and actually in Alaska we don't have programs. What we have is we have alternative certification to recognize people who speak the language and are recognized in their community as experts, as being able to be classroom teachers, with some controversy around this. But I was going to say, for our colleagues who are not here, Memorial University in Canada has an effort to prepare more Inuit speakers in Nunavut, and I would highly recommend trying to look that information up if you're interested, because it is, for me, what I've heard described is very exciting, and I'd like to see that be a model that is adopted in Alaska and elsewhere.
Учителей немецкого языка готовят в колледже, который расположен в городе Нарин-Маре, в центре Ненецкого автономного округа. Это самый крупный и главный город этого округа.
As for the teacher education of Nenets language in Russia, there is a college in Naryan-Mar. Naryan-Mar is the capital city of the Nenets Autonomous District, which prepares teachers of the Nenets language.
Учителей саамского языка готовят только в Национальном культурном центре саамской вот этой культуры, который расположен в селе Лафозеро. Там они могут, желающие могут и сами изучать язык, и готовиться к тому, чтобы учить саамскому языку других.
And as for the Sami language, we have mentioned the National Cultural Center of the Sami language, which is situated in the Lavozero village. It also prepares teachers. It does not only give the opportunities to those who want to learn the Sami language, but it also prepares teachers from those who speak Sami.
And for Scotland, we do have a shortage. It's interesting that the Scottish Government controls the number of teachers that can be qualified from each university in Scotland in English. But in Gaelic, you can have as many as you like on the programme, so the universities see it's a major money-making opportunity. The other thing that you can do, and one of the things that I meant to mention is one of our biggest problems in Gaelic education, in the Gaelic medium, is that we have, I would say I think the figures are something like 2/3 of the children who come into the Gaelic medium education do not come from families who are Gaelic speaking, which is a huge problem because they don't have parents that can help with the homework. But those young people are now coming through the system, and they're fluent Gaelic speakers and writers, and they are becoming our new teachers. And it's been so successful that we've been able to actually start a conversion programme at the Gaelic University. So teachers who have qualified as English medium teachers are funded by the Scottish Government to do what's called the Course Arkhangelsk, which is a distance course to learn Gaelic, and then they go for a year to Skye to convert, or they can do it by distance from across Scotland to convert to get into Gaelic teaching. So again, very similar, and they've probably worked with Cape Breton and with Memorial as they've developed that programme. So thank you for that question, very good. Another question, yes, Claire.
I don't know if it will go beyond a bit the discussion, but I was wondering, do you see any continuous or a line of the same vision, I would say, between education in Indigenous languages and opportunities of job in Indigenous languages? Because I feel sometimes, if people are getting educated with their Indigenous languages, is there as many kind of job opportunities talking and using their own languages versus they use it, they went to university, they were fluent, but then they hit the job market and they cannot use their language. So I was just wondering if you see, perhaps in your respective countries, any vision that goes along, or you see perhaps a gap. Yeah.
I went first last time, so something else.
Would you like me to go first, and then you can have a think?
Yeah.
So in Scotland, we have reached a point where actually I've got quite grumpy with my parents because I had to do French, German, and Latin before I was allowed in my final year in school to do a little bit of Gaelic. And I've been stomping my foot at home with my parents because I could have a really good job with the BBC now. Yes, there's really good opportunities. One of the videos I'd love to show you is of Dougie, who came into Gaelic learning because he wanted to learn the violin, the fiddle, and he went to lessons with the Feish. He became involved in Gaelic. He then went to the university to learn it. His family now are all Gaelic speakers, and he works running the short courses at the university. There are also publishing houses. The BBC has both a radio station and a television station. The Gaelic University runs programmes preparing people to do Gaelic journalism, Gaelic film production, and they also run a lot of business courses in Gaelic because obviously we can use it within our tourism industry. So there are opportunities to now use it. And I have a friend whose she's a copy editor, and her entire job is publishing Gaelic books within one of the Gaelic publishing houses. So not 20 years ago, but now, yes, lots.
So of course, one of the challenges in Alaska is 20 different languages. And actually, of those 20 languages, several have lost their last native speaker within the last couple of decades. So there are communities in which Yupik language is the dominant language spoken from little kids to elders, and there would be room to move into the health positions, but there's small communities and there aren't very many jobs there. If I jump over to Greenland, there's an interesting challenge there because, of course, in Greenland, the Inuit Greenlandic language is the dominant language. but for people to go on to post-secondary education, they have to learn Danish or English. And there's this huge tension that young people we talk with are experiencing in wanting to have quality experience and opportunities in Greenlandic. And though they have teachers who teach Greenlandic language in the schools, they tend not to be as well educated, as not as formally educated as the Danish educators in the schools. And so there's all sorts of tensions in terms of whether it's an academic Greenlandic language and how well it's being taught versus Danish. And so I think there's some really interesting challenges, and I can only speak to the challenges, obviously, I'm an outsider looking in there. But I think it is the same tension is happening in Canada and you know, even for those Inuit communities or Inupiaq communities in Alaska, to think about what does it mean to create those opportunities and own that linguistic expertise. I will say, if you grow up bilingual, really genuinely bilingual, there's all sorts of research about what it does for your brain. And so even if you are growing up fully bilingual in the Tsimshian language and never able to use that in the workplace, you probably are still academically ahead of the monolingual English speaker in that same community.
Well, in Finnish Lapland, there aren't very many sources of living where to pick off. So that's why many Sami people have been forced to move away. But talking about using the initiative or the native language of yours, one of my graduate students just finished her master's thesis about establishing a Sami Scout in Inari. They had to pick up one of the Sami languages there, and I think that's a marvelous opportunity for the young children to use their language outside school also and outside your own home. But they faced many difficulties when they started translating those vocabularies, and because of the small scouts are wolf puppies, or I don't know what's the right word, but wolves are a huge threat for reindeer herders. So it was out of the question that they could use that kind of word there. So they had to pick a general word meaning puppy. Luckily they had one in northern Sami. Yeah.
Okay, Chris.
Yes, so like I think in Finland too, in some most Finnish Lappish municipalities, there's a lack of work, so those unemployment rates are rather high. And I think, of course, the immigrants from urban cities, young Sami people, some families, young families, they would like to go to Sami for their own, the regions in the northern part of Finland, but the work is a big issue. But of course, they are bilingual, so they speak our Finnish well, of course. But this is, I think they would like to, because of the cultural meaning, they would like to, because of transfer the culture itself, it would be wonderful to live in that place, and I think work is a big issue. But distance learning and using these digital possibilities, it could be one possible, and I'm sure some families nowadays, they are working distance many ways.
Что касается немецкого языка, то те педагоги, которые овладели этим языком, готовы его преподавать, они в Ненецком автономном округе очень востребованы. Как я уже говорила, у нас там целый большой комплекс учреждений, образовательных детских садов, школ, где идет обучение на ненецком языке. Кроме того, люди, знающие ненецкий язык, готовые на нем разговаривать, общаться и особенно писать, очень нужны в общественно-политической жизни округа. Это и газеты, и журналы, и общественные объединения. И вот в этом аспекте чаще всего востребованы люди, знающие ненецкий язык.
In the Nenets Autonomous District, there is a high demand for teachers of Nenets language, since there are many schools and other educational establishments where teachers are always required, and people who speak Nenets but who do not want to be teachers, they can work as journalists in newspapers, magazines, in some social establishments. The Nenets language is quite widespread there, and there are job opportunities.
Сложнее у нас вот в нашем арктическом регионе обстоит дело с языком саамов. Дело в том, что в общеобразовательных учреждениях, как я уже говорила в своем выступлении, саамский язык преподается по желанию детей и родителей и факультативно. И поэтому сейчас стоит вопрос очень серьезно о сохранении языка и увеличении количества людей, которые могли бы и учить этому языку, и сохранять его, потому что по наблюдениям, по данным исследователей, саамский язык в России, вот сейчас в нашем регионе, используется больше для бытового общения и в меньшей степени для вот такого общественного.
The situation with the Sami language is more difficult since, as Svetlana has mentioned earlier, the education of Sami, the teaching of Sami is only supplementary in schools. So there are not many Sami speakers, and Sami is mainly spoken in families, not anywhere else. The question is very serious. It is now being discussed how to preserve the Sami language and how to make it more popular, more used.
One last comment. I know that many of the attendees at this conference work in the physical sciences, and one of the biggest conversations that we have when we're teaching in high school particularly is if they are nearing the end of high school and they're studying science and they're doing it through the medium of the Indigenous language. Do you use the English word for the very technical terms, or do you make up one because there isn't one in our language for many of those technical terms in chemistry? There is not a Gaelic word for the word test tube, for example. So do you code switch, or sometimes we make words up actually. Yeah. So our time is nearly gone. I'm going to ask each member of the panel to very briefly, because we've only got 5 minutes before we do the book launch, could you very briefly describe what you think the major challenges facing your region as far as inclusive education or Indigenous language education or use is? Who would like to go first?
In the Alaska context, I'd say that we are suffering still the multi-generational trauma from colonization. And so many people have families that have experienced loss of language and culture, and also the effects of having family who were taken away. You know, even if the boarding school experience ended in the 1970s and even 1980s in Alaska, it was late there. That has continued, so this disconnect, schools are imposed from outside, the community does not see the schools as belonging to them, and so we have this huge barrier to overcome, regardless of the language that is the medium of instruction.
Concerning Finnish Lapland, The main problem might be the small population, and because of the small population and the difficulties to find a way of living there in the northern district, the languages and the cultures are in danger to vanish because the people have to move into bigger cities. Well, that might be one problem.
I think with the relative flourishing of the Sami culture in the north of Norway, one specific challenge will be how do we respect that newly blossoming diversity, because there's linguistic diversity. There are at least 3 active Sami languages in Norway. Which one will be dominant or not? We should also consider how other migration trends affect. We are ever more mobile. We have been receiving people from all over the world now in the north of Norway. So how do we preserve this blossoming of a previously potentially dying culture and language, while embracing the new languages and culture that are arriving on our doorstep?
Okay, and in some languages, quite the same in Alaska, and like Sue said, and I'd like to say that's something it's challenging to have because we have a lack of teachers, qualified teachers. We have a lack of material written in Sami language, despite of this threatening and vanishing, disappearing languages, but because education and the pathway from the early years until the higher level, it's a question for the answer to question how to keep it alive.
Что касается ненецкого языка, то, наверное, стоит подчеркнуть, что сейчас главный вызов, главная проблема, которую мы решаем, это дальнейшее развитие этого языка. А вот что касается языка саамов в России, то сейчас главный вызов и главная проблема – это сохранение этого языка, потому что количество саамов очень небольшое на территории России, всего чуть больше 350 человек, и нам важно сохранить этот язык как элемент общей многонациональной культуры России.
The main challenge for the Nenets language is its further development, but we can say that it's in quite safe position nowadays. As for the Sami language, the problem is the preservation of the language itself, since the number of native speakers is very low in Russia, and we have to struggle to preserve the Sami language as a part of the general multinational culture of Russia.
Thank you. So thinking about all those challenges that there are in education, the University of the Arctic Thematic Network for Teacher Education, we are bound together by a desire to work transnationally to actually address and support the communities, but also the teachers, to deal with these challenges that we're facing that are quite specific to the Arctic regions and to the north. And our most recent project has been to publish our first book. And I'm going to hand over just now to Diane, who's going to introduce it, because today is the launch of that book.
Yes. Yes. And we are really excited. If you knew how quickly this came together and the phenomenal support from the University of Lapland to get this done, it really was quite the effort. And so we'll do this pretty quickly, but first we need to acknowledge that 3 of us sitting here were editors, but there is a 4th editor who is off enjoying the next phase of her adventure in life, Jenny Spratt. And so we have to share with you that's from her retirement party, but she's being a grandma, she's bird watching, she's doing yoga, and she, I don't think she really misses us a whole lot.
She doesn't miss it at all.
No, so, but we do want to acknowledge she played an important part in this book. So briefly, first of all, there are copies of the book here, and we hope that people who are interested will take a copy, and also the conclusions of the project that was done. This was actually the Finnish Arctic Council Chairmanship Sustainable Development Working Group project. I got everything right. And there's actually multiple projects that we have managed to bring together with this, which has been really exciting too. It's a very active and creative group of people that are involved. And but for the book in particular, when we put out the call, we were not prescriptive in how people should approach the topic of inclusion and equity. And we didn't want to create a uniform set of indicators of equity and inclusion, or even try to define these concepts across the national context. Instead, we wanted authors to bring to bear their own expertise and their own perspectives. And the result is a work that really reflects the diversity not only of our local and national context, but also of the field of education, research, and practice, as well as the broader disciplinary lenses that all of us use when we ground our own work. And so we've got kind of three broad areas, or three commonalities that seem to be emerging depending on which set of countries you look at in here. We really had as you said, there were different approaches, and so in some cases the chapters focus very much on inclusion for children with special needs. And that was in particular the Finland, Norway, and Iceland chapters. And then we had others that were focusing much more on the issues of indigeneity and post-colonialism. And these were Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and the Sami chapter. And then we had chapters that were looking at socioeconomic and political issues. In particular, that was England and Scotland, the UK, England, Scotland. And then governance and student empowerment, which was the Sweden chapter, and then the multiculturalism, that is Russia. But I think altogether, it really was this really amazing journey through thinking about different ways of looking at inclusion and equity, as well as beginning to understand commonalities across our regions. I'm going to hand it to you for the final chapter. Oh, yes. Yes.
And because we realised we were taking a very northern perspective on all these issues, we decided that for the final chapter we would invite a very good critical friend of ours in the thematic network, Sue Dockett, who works in Australia. And what she did was, when we had the first drafts in of all the chapters, she read them all and gave us a southern perspective on looking at education through southern eyes, which I think adds even more to the richness of the book. And she did it at very, very short notice, after she had also retired. There's something about being in our network that you retire soon after.
Yes.
So we hope that if you're interested, you would take one of the books and enjoy reading each of the chapters. And that's the book launch.
Yes.
Yay! So I'd like to thank audience for your questions and your participation, and also the panel for your very, very interesting presentations and responses to the questions. Thank you all very much. It's been really enjoyable.
Thank you.